In 1908, at his home just outside Paris, the French banker and philanthropist Albert Kahn began devising his hugely ambitious plan to create an archive of the planet. The following year, he launched the project in earnest by recruiting his first professional photographer. Auguste Léon had worked for some time as a postcard photographer. He was meticulous and skillful with cameras. For the next 20 years, Kahn dispatched Léon all over Europe with the new autochrome camera system. Some of his earliest pictures were shot in the picturesque Loire Valley in northeast France. Before the First World War, he also travelled to the area of Puy-de-Dôme, one of the largest départements in central France. Puy-de-Dôme's landscape is studded with ancient volcanic hills. Today, its capital, Clermont-Ferrand, is a thriving industrial city, home to the giant Michelin tire company. But a century ago, it was still a sleepy backwater that came to life on market days. Outside the city, Léon encountered a people who remained intimately connected to the land.
This is very reminiscent of my childhood. There was a lot of farming in the area, and that was the main form of income. I used to see these carts going through my village. Work was very hard. They didn't have a very good yield. But the people didn't demand much. They were quite content.
Many people still wore the traditional local costume and spoke the regional dialect or patois. At the turn of the century, a schoolteacher observed that just a few miles outside Clermont-Ferrand, very few adults spoke French.
The patois of each region had a different pronunciation, and there was a great problem understanding people from elsewhere. The patois from one place was spoken differently from the patois spoken 60 kilometers away.
The same was true in other areas visited by Kahn's photographers, including Brittany in western France. Here people spoke the Breton language and lived according to rituals and traditions that were unique to the region.
France was a collage of languages, of cultures, of different religious practices, and of a great deal of pride in that very difference. Who came from the Puy-de-Dôme area would never be confused with people who came from Provence or people who came from the west of France.
But some nationalist politicians viewed these regional differences as a threat to the unity of France. They wanted to promote a shared national culture. But this would have undermined the cultural diversity that fascinated Albert Kahn.
I think that the main reason why Albert Kahn wanted to have photographs of the regions of France was because this was also a time when the rural populations were part of a new French identity that was being forged at that time. Differences being ironed out. More and more people who live in France are expected to speak French, where the Minister of Education knows at any time of any day what each school class is doing. You brought this great country, which had been very diverse, and made it into one singular entity.
In the years before the outbreak of World War I, increasing conflict between the nations of Europe edged the continent towards the brink of war. Governments tried to instill in their people a greater sense of loyalty and national pride.
It was widely felt that developing a strong sense of national identity was very important, because by the late 19th century it was accepted that a war would have to be a mass war involving millions of young men, and it's crucial that those young men felt patriotic and willing to fight and die for their country.
But Kahn's autochromes hint at a serious problem facing the French nation.
Léon's portrayal of the fertility of France has a double edge to it. On one hand, it's a rural idyll. It has a beauty of its own. On the other hand, the land in many of these photographs is empty, and this is a problem. The problem is that the strength of France could only be maintained if people stayed on the land and if its population grew. Neither was the case. The rural France of these photographs is depopulated. It's a place where people don't have large families anymore, or if they do, the children scatter.
Because of changing social attitudes and the increased use of birth control, France had the lowest birth rate in Europe. At a time of mounting international tensions, this demographic time bomb became a matter of national security.
To portray the countryside, the source of great vitality and strength, as depopulated is a very important issue. You can see in front of your eyes why the French army might not be a match to the German.
The German population was growing more than 6 times faster than the French. By the eve of the First World War, when Germany was mobilizing its forces, they enjoyed a huge military advantage. Their army had 2.5 million more soldiers than the French. As a committed pacifist, Kahn abhorred the imminent prospect of war. He tried to promote understanding between people of different cultures. Through his collection of autochromes, he wanted to celebrate the colorful tapestry of European life.
Europe in 1910 was a Tower of Babel. There were over 100 languages or dialects spoken quite normally in most major states. There was extraordinary diversity, cultural, linguistic, physical diversity, different colors, different skins, different languages, different religions. The enormous variety of European life in 1910 has vanished over the century. But if we go back 100 years, we can see a very different world.
In 1910, Kahn accompanied his photographer, Auguste Léon, to Scandinavia.